What do you think of that particular clip?
Well, I think it's adorable that the fire that they were able to find to put in there, because we were burning cities down, was like you could stomp on it and put it out, which is great. But it was a lot of projection, you know. It felt like it was just a biography. Like, you know, we want power, we want total control, and we want everybody to believe what we believe, you know, and have one God and one focus. And life will be so much better if everybody's just like us.
Yeah, he does talk about that a lot. The projection is very, very evident.
That same sentiment, Gal, that you just mentioned about, you know, having this one God, and that's Mike Flynn, right? I mean, Mike Flynn came out and said we have to have, you know, a singular God. And if you look at some of the things that Mike Flynn has been up to, I mean, obviously anybody who, you know, follows me knows about the whiteboard already. That whiteboard has led me to some places about, you know, where they're having these tours. These Christian churches are being filled with misinformation because Mike Flynn and that sort of group that he's tied with are going there and feeding them this information about tyranny and masks and, you know, all this other nonsense. But it is being done through the Christian churches. It is being done to a certain group here.
And this is why there is so much antagonism in the church circles and also amongst Republicans against the masks and against vaccinations. They view the masks and the vaccinations as tyranny because they've been fed this diet of everything is tyrannical and they're coming to take away your freedoms. So in that context, you would look at masks and vaccinations, these mandates, as being, you know, sort of tyrannical. People are forcing you to do things. It's
governmental overreach, right? So they preach that there's, you know, the government is going to overreach and they want a big brother and they're going to be in your pocket all the time. And then they actually make it happen. So then they're, you know, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're making it occur.
Yeah, it's just, I think the pandemic was like the perfect opportunity for the libertarian ideology that kind of has always wanted to have that sovereignty that they kind of imagine exists or needs to exist. I just think they saw a way to like sneak in with disinformation and capture it and kind of create this new Republican Party. Because when you look back at Roger Stone and some of these operatives that have been playing in politics for decades, that is their ideology. They are libertarian populists. So they talk about, you know, just America first and a very limited federal government, states' rights. You see Ron DeSantis talking about a lot of these operatives that are basically spun from Roger Stone have this ideology.
Yeah, those are very astute points. You know, I think it's also important to remember that this guy ran an online publication called Russian Insider, which for years has been feeding propaganda and extremist points of view to American audiences. I mean, he has written about denying the Holocaust. He has had the launch of the National Justice Party, a neo-Nazi party, at a barn that he owns. Now, no one else would host that kind of event. Only someone who was really interested in that party growing would host that kind of event. And who would have that interest? Someone like Charles Bausman, which is probably why he hosted the National Justice Party at his barn. This is someone who was inflaming the ideas that we are now dealing with for years in America for the Russian government. It's not just that he's just a guy, you know, who showed up on Russian television and is analyzing things. He is the instigator of a lot of these points of view and the inflamer of these points of view in America. So, you know, my opinion, a really dangerous kind of guy.
And we should mention too, Zev, that he's pretty close with Alex Jones. I mean, you could look at this video from Bausman and think it came off InfoWars, in my opinion.
Very similar lines of thinking. You sent me a great clip on Alex Jones earlier on. So there's two clips that I really want to show you. One of them is Ed Lazansky. The other one is Alex Jones. I don't know why they're not here. It's so frustrating, but I will play for them for you in a bit. Let's get back to one more of him. You know, this is, again, an extension of what we've been talking about, but he sort of branches out into how there are two versions, you know, lining up for America, that there is a potential version where liberals are going to enslave Americans, the sort of leftist, globalist ideology is going to enslave Americans, or a version where Trump and his supporters are going to somehow magically save America and return them to freedom. I mean, it's complete nonsense. Again, Russian state TV propaganda. Don't believe what you're about to see. But this is just interesting in terms of understanding how the Republicans are framing their thinking.
Or it's entirely possible, like in the Russian Revolution, that eventually these radical leftists will come to power and they'll enslave the country and terrorize it and do all the terrible things to Americans that they did to Russians. So nobody knows right now what's going to happen. That's what makes this situation so terrifying. And the world should really understand that America is on the verge of going down the path that Russia went in the revolution. Well, it's a terrible tragedy for America if it happens, but it's a terrible risk for the rest of the world. Because if America becomes the radical leftist country now, the way Russia became 100 years ago, with all its military power and all its economic power, this is going to be a huge problem for Europe, a huge problem for Russia.
It's cut off at the end there, but he actually says the huge problem for China at the end there. I mean, really? America's going to be a big problem for China and he cares about that? Like, why is that an issue? The whole thing is insane, obviously. Like, we're not heading into a Russian revolution, but you can certainly see what they would like people to believe. And you could certainly see what they're trying to make Republican Party talking points out of, and certainly trying to tell Republicans what they should be fearful of, when this is clearly not happening. There's nothing in the Biden administration that feels anything like a Russian revolution. I mean, it's the most conciliatory government you've ever come across, and certainly, reaching across the aisle where possible many, many times. And there's no sense for me that you're looking at a chipping away of rights or anything like that. So it's complete nonsense. But, there he is espousing it.
I just want to say, we're not insisting that, the Republicans are watching Russian television, okay? What they're doing is using active measures and different propaganda tactics to put this information in front of Republicans. So we're not accusing Republicans of, knowingly spreading Russian propaganda. We're not accusing them of going to Russia state TV websites and learning this stuff. But there are methods that are being used, like, for instance, when Ted Cruz retweeted, a military commercial straight from Russian propaganda TV. So I wanted to be clear that we're not accusing them of actually going and acquiring this and then disseminating it. It's being disseminated to them through tactics that they don't even recognize.
There's an ecosystem that, distributes these talking points, and it certainly might start at Russian television, or it might start in the fringes of the internet. It might start on Parler or on Gab or whatever it is they exist today. But it launders itself through the system and it lands up in the Republican Party, as we saw through the Epps accusations in the last few days, which we're going to get to in just a second.
It's just interesting. I remember after 2016, a little bit after that, I think, I recall somebody, I don't remember exactly which arm of the Kremlin they were in, but they were removed from the meeting by having their head put in a bag, right? So somebody put a bag over their head, they released them from the meeting. If we were descending into what Bausman is espousing, then Jim Jordan would have had his head in a bag, right? I mean, all those things would be happening. None of those things are happening.
No, of course not. Of course not. And we're following the rule of law. And, if ever there's an argument for Merrick Garland's sort of appeasement, if you would call it that, then this would be it.
We're a year out, and we're still talking about whether or not we can subpoena members of Congress, right? I mean,
just to testify.
Yeah.
Never mind for any criminal activity. So
we're nowhere near that.
Nowhere near that at all. But let's just look at someone on the chat. David is talking about Car Arms facility. So Car Arms is run by the brother of the Reverend Sean Moon, who's the son of the real Reverend Moon. None of them are real reverends, of course. He runs the ministry of the Iron Rod, which is this crazy fanatical right-wing ministry, which basically celebrates the AK-47 as its god. And they were present there at the Capitol. And their friends, Bausman is very close to the Reverend Sean Moon. They've appeared many times in protests together and have basically coordinated events, we believe, because on January the 3rd, we know that the Moonies and their entourage was staying with Bausman at Bausman's barn over there on their way to the January 6th events, where they were caught on tape and even shared video of them taking part in the coup attempt. Go ahead, Gal.
I believe, I don't know the exact date, I think it was in maybe November, but Car Arms actually was one of the sponsors for one of these kind of Christian rallies that you're talking about, Joe, where Mike Flynn was and several of these other people out there, and the Reverend Moon. Yeah, he was there also. So I don't know if you guys saw that event, but
this is the event on the 30th of December. The one on the 30th of December? Is that the one?
No, it was before that. It was a really big one, and Car Arms was the sponsor for it.
Oh, this is the Freedom Rally. They do this big Freedom Rally thing that they do. Yeah, it's true. Bannon was talking there. Dana Loesch, I think, is that her name? She was speaking there. Ridiculously high-profile people to be at a freedom event by the Ministry of the Iron Rod. What a ridiculous name that is.
Dana Loesch was the host of NRATV, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Good point.
She has her own show now too, just so you guys know. I monitor that sometimes also, and it's pretty awful.
Oh, thank you for doing that. that's real service.
Taking one for the team.
But really, it's interesting. Why does a church need to have a arms manufacturer aligned to it? I don't know too many churches that do that, but here's one that does. It's kind of doesn't make any sense. And I think they make Trump gun, if I'm not mistaken, the gun with the Trump logo on it. So someone is saying, Jessa BAHX says, so I wonder if Bausman had a hand in the disinfo campaign in Philly that I kept coming into contact with while canvassing in the city for 2020 election. Absolutely, he did. He was out there a lot, and there's video of him and the Reverend Moon outside. I don't remember the Secretary of State there, but outside his offices and his home protesting and, saying crazy things, honestly. But I've played that on a previous show, and people can find that in my past episodes about Bausman if people are looking for that. But absolutely was involved in that. Now,
Bausman was recording him when he was speaking. Bausman went live. Mm-hmm. He
did lots of live streaming. I think he was also live streaming the event. Happened on January the 6th, but to probably a closed audience, likely in the Kremlin or something. David is responding here. If Bausman was working in PA, you could bet he visited the Car Arms. I would say that's probably likely true. And Upstate Farmer is saying that guns should be microchipped with IDs like dogs. Interesting for traceability. And then Jesse here again saying, and the strange right-wing coverage of the lootings and riots in Philly where they manufactured fake news about lighting churches on fire and stuff. I didn't realize they had faked some of that. That is interesting. All of that probably is coordinated. You would imagine that's all coordinated, and it's probably coordinated out of the Kremlin. And that's why it seems to work so seamlessly. So I've cut it down because I couldn't handle the whole thing. So there's an edit in the middle of that. It's not entirely as you're seeing it here. But this is when Alex Jones found out that Vladimir Putin, for some reason, was a fan of his show and said hello to him. I don't know who this other guy on here is. I think it's his correspondent. But let's take a look at what he had to say.
The economy, because like you said, it's a mixed bag.
Vladimir Putin says to say hello, by the way.
Did that really happen?
Oh, yeah. He said, when you see Alex, tell him I said hello.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I better not go over there, though.
I'm going to interview Putin this year.
Really?
Yeah, going over there.
Now I am interested in this because I was told by the head of RT America before they even launched it, like 8-9 years ago. Putin's a big listener, and by the way, he likes how you play.
He loves my show. He imitated me at the 10-year anniversary dinner.
Well, I know you're a big star all over the world, and Putin knows you.
Yeah, he's imitated me. I did this thing where David Cameron ripped his shirt off at the governor's dinner, and he looked at this clip and he said, "Your journalists are very interesting. The one, Max, who ripped his shirt off is very interesting."
Let's get back to the Putin thing. Oh, this will be newsworthy. Let me hear this. What did he say?
Well, I'm just telling what he said. I noticed you like to go bare-chested now. I mean, I think Putin started that.
I did that as a joke.
That whole bare-chesting thing.
I did it to troll the media.
This is what drives liberals crazy, because Putin dares to be a heterosexual. So therefore,
guys, can we Google Alex Jones on a horse?
Evil in some way.
Alex Jones on a horse.
Putin's heterosexual, and so therefore,
I'm not bragging, but aren't those some big pecs?
Just I want to get the last line here.
Awesome pecs. Those are Putin-sized pecs. You've got Putin pecs.
I'm sorry.
Alex Putin peck. That's right. He on the horse, all naked. So this is what drives the liberals crazy. Especially in Britain, where not a single person in government would be classified as.
I'm trying to get to say
I shouldn't have been laughing because I was laughing when I did it. No, I did it to troll him, and then the media was like in a whole bunch of newspapers. They go,
"He's a role model. He's bringing peace around the world. He's a statesman." And so...
See, I am a Russian agent.
What I was trying to get to is when he says he's a Russian agent. Sorry, I had to put you through all that. But, really, there's not enough time in the world to apologize for that. I really can't say sorry enough. But, the things about Alex Jones, it might be laughing about it there, but he really is a part of that ecosystem we talk about, which is, disseminating this Russian disinformation everywhere. And, it's not a surprise to me that he was also once awarded an award by the public arm of the SVR, which is basically the espionage services of Russia, an award for humanitarian rights and freedom, because he was banned by Google in America. They awarded him an award along with Maria Butina that year. So, this is a guy who's got close ties to Russia. He certainly seems to admire Putin. I mean, couldn't be admiring Putin any more than he was there.
He was pretty proud. Yeah. I mean, you could see the look on his face. He looked really proud of that statement that, Putin was at least, he was on Putin's radar. I mean, I wouldn't be proud of that.
Well, when he talked to the head of RT before RT launched, he's talking about Alexander Dugin.
Oh, really? Wow. Are you sure it's Alexander
Yes.
Dugin? I didn't realize he started.
Yeah, there's documents. That's who he was talking to. Yeah, there's documents with that.
Oh, that's really interesting. Alexander Dugin, by the way, just to bring this all full circle for everyone, is Putin's Rasputin, who's tied to Konstantin Malofeev. He's certainly the person who funds all his work. And as you can see, that's part of the Charles Bausman influence circle that we see in Russia through the Russian Orthodox Church. That's really interesting information. I'm not going to play any more of Charles Bausman's documentary because, frankly, I can't stomach very much more of it. But I do want to just, bring us back full circle to say one thing about it, which is that those talking points, but the false flag, the idea that Pence somehow backstabbed the former president, and the idea that he was the reason we landed up with all the violence, those talking points are actually becoming real in the Republican circles. Certainly the kind of talking points they've started to push. And particularly this idea that the FBI informants did this. And this we've been seeing lately with the story around Mr. Epps. Ray Epps. So Washington Post had a piece today after Ted Cruz again brought up what people have been alleging about Epps, which is basically that he was on the most wanted list, that this is an allegation that he was a FBI informant, and that on the night of January the 5th, he was caught on tape telling people to storm the Capitol the next day. You know the story better than I do, both of you actually, but why don't you pick it up here, Joe, and tell people more about who this guy, Mr. Epps, is.
Yeah, so Ray Epps is I think he was the Arizona president chapter for the Oath Keepers, right? Mm-hmm. So this goes back a long ways. I think back in 2011, he was with Stuart Rhodes at some hometown buffet, and they were, talking about things. So they go way back. The thing about Ray Epps is he is sort of this thing that they've found, I feel, right? It's like, I think if you look at the video that I think it was Baked Alaska. I think there's a guy Baked Alaska.
That is Baked Alaska, yeah, for sure.
And he started to chant about him being a Fed, right? So there you have this whole group surrounding Ray Epps. I think it was January 5th. And at that night, he's basically out there telling a crowd, we have to storm the Capitol. We have to go into the building, right? And he's saying we have to go in. And then a whole group's around him and they kind of say, Fed, Fed, Fed. Now, I don't know how that came to be. I don't know, how that video was edited. I'm not sure.
This is on the live stream. It's on Baked Alaska's live stream. So I actually saw this live stream right the next day. So legitimately the live stream. And it's an event that they're having the night before in I don't know where.
So I think they sort of take this as, the kernel of truth, right? You have this little morsel that you can then build upon this narrative, right? You could then say, well, wait a second, this guy was calling for people. You could see it. Here he is on video and he's pointing and say, we have to go into that building. Now, to take that and blow it into he was the ringleader for all this stuff, right, is ridiculous. I mean, there's no proof to that. I think he even testified to the January 6th committee that he wasn't, that's not true. This
is what's happened in the last few days. The committee has come out, and said, and it's very rare for them to say, that this guy said to them under oath that he is not operating as an FBI informant. Now, I mean, the language here might be difficult and is complicated to parse because there are, in fact, many confidential informants working for the FBI all the time.
Sure.
Many people think Donald Trump is an FBI informant, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that he is an FBI informant. And maybe one of the reasons they can't prosecute him is because he's an FBI informant. There are a lot of people in the Trump world that are former criminals who have deals with prosecutors in order to get them off of their crimes. That might mean that they were FBI informants. It doesn't mean that they're not also acting in their own interests by supporting whomever they want to support as Americans. And so it's a difficult thing for people to parse.
Well, I actually want to insert another option, which is a lot of these guys, they're former military, they are former police officers. I think Ray Epps was former police. And I don't want to downplay that loyalty that they feel to the country. I think it is still really important to recognize that. And to me, Ray Epps he's about, I don't know, my dad's age maybe or something. And, I think personally that Ray Epps probably turned himself in as somebody who does have, follow an oath, believes in law and order, things like that, of that age group. And it's likely that he's just cooperating. There's an opportunity there that he wasn't an informant to begin with or anything. He just was there. He thought he was doing the right thing based on all the propaganda he was fed. And when he realized that he crossed a line and committed crimes, then he turned himself in.
There certainly were a lot of military.
A former police officer might do,
There's a lot of military and police officers there, you're right. And that's important that we need to note that. But, the language around confidential informant and operating witness or whatever they call it, they're very similar things. Some people might view the confidential informant as a cooperating witness because they often are similar things. Am I misreading what you said?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, because if you're cooperating, it's because you were part of the conspiracy. So you are cooperating to lessen your, sentence against you, essentially, is what I mean.
Lots of people have prosecutors' agreements from before, from crimes they've done before, which get them off the hook for various things.
Right.
I'm talking those people are also informants. They have it under a prosecutor's agreement that they're informants and they're not allowed to do certain things, but they're also informants. And a lot of that's where it gets really fuzzy.
But I don't think Ray Epps falls into that.
We don't think he's an informant at all. We don't know if he is.
I don't.
The truth is we don't know. And the FBI will never share that with anybody because if they did, they wouldn't be confidential informants. And so the whole thing falls apart and they can't prosecute crimes and the whole system sort of,
That's why the mendacity of Ted Cruz is boundless. He absolutely knows that, I think he was questioning somebody in a judiciary hearing and he was saying, one of the FBI folks, I think it was Jill Sanborn, he was saying, were there any active participants, federal agents who were active participants?
Right.
Well, what's an active participant? Active in what? Participating in what? And then I think the other part of it is, he's saying, were they confidential informants? Well, Ted, you just said confidential. She can't tell you that. And if she's going to tell you anything, it's going to be, the FBI or the DOJ line of, I'm not going to jeopardize any ongoing investigations. So he knows that she can't answer it. And he asks the question knowing that he's going to get that response so that he can then put it as a soundbite out on the news so that people could then fill in with their own bias in their own mind what that really means, right? So they lead you to your own conclusions, which is why this is such a dangerous thing to have this misinformation spread out to millions.
And then they blur the language. They take this language of, here's an informant or a prosecuting witness is cooperating with the prosecution, and they meld that with FBI agents are out there doing things in the ground, which, I don't know if FBI agents were out there doing things on the ground. Maybe some informants were. Maybe they were just being informants. Maybe they were just there to see what was going on. But you got to remember that this language and this idea started last year on January the 7th with Charles Bausman on Russian TV. And it's only now becoming the center stage argument of the Republican Party a year or so later because run out of other things, so I frankly argue that, we're now back at this idea that, the FBI was somehow involved in fomenting it. How would the FBI have done everything involved? Did the FBI suddenly possess the bodies of Boebert and all the other Congress people? Did they suddenly embody those people in order to arrange the events? Did they give the tours of Congress, all these rioters that came there? Were they Donald Trump that day? Were they possessing Donald Trump's body that day and not asking people to go away and to calm down and to bring peace back to the Capitol? They couldn't have done all of those things. Maybe they had an informant or two on the ground. Maybe one of them was taking their role more seriously than others. But to suggest that this is now indicative of an entire operation is nonsense. It's not possible. It's just not possible.
And think of who would have had to do it, right? It would have been the deep state that they're completely against anyways, right? So they completely harp on the deep state. Meanwhile, if it were to happen, it would have been the deep state to have done it.
Good point. Well, absolutely.
I mean,
it's complete nonsense.
Double agent deep state.
Right. Because that's the problem. You start watching these things and you land up twisting yourself into knots. I mean, I was watching this entire documentary today and I was like, what is he actually arguing? It makes no sense. There's no ways all these things could be true at the same time. Each of them could be true on their own, but certainly not at the same time. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think they understand the right-wing ecosystem so well. And this is what we see with some of the narrative that happens is there's a statement made without evidence. And then all of a sudden the evidence is produced. And I think that's what we're looking at here. Because originally we're looking at, it's Antifa. Then all of a sudden you have, you Jack Posobiec's, those little guys that run around and, spread bullshit, excuse my language, and they find it for them.
Yeah.
They find it and they bring it up. And then all of a sudden the Congress people are like, I had evidence this whole time. But they don't. And so when you look at this FBI thing, I think that's where this comes from too, because Baked Alaska would have been one of those people in that right-wing ecosystem who would have been the searcher of the evidence prior to this. So he probably said, oh man, I had this guy on my live stream. You guys check this out. We were messing with him and we were saying, Fed, it'll be perfect, right? So it's like they find their evidence after they create the statement.
I do want to play this one last thing. Yesterday we tied this all back through Grant Stern's incredible reporting with Patrick Simpson to Ed Lazansky. And it was very revealing to me how involved Ed Lazansky has been in not only amplifying this philosophy that, America's on its decline and somehow we have to return to the monarchy or autocracy, but also how responsible he is for actually putting together a lot of these activists, including, or these spy groups, whatever you want to call them, including Charles Bausman. So we know that Charles Bausman and Lazansky were very close. They refer to each other as friends. Lazansky is also one of the writers on Charles Bausman's Russian Insider. And that's interesting. And they both, speak at various events together. They support each other on a regular basis. And just so we are reminded, Lazansky is a very long-term operative here in the United States with links that are very, very deeply tied to the Republican Party's operatives like Paul Manafort, Donald Trump, of course, Roger Stone, Jack Kemp. And, you can see the list down there. Dmitry Simes is another Russian spy that was sent home. Dana Rohrabacher is there. This is the who's who of Russian interference all the way into 2020. Plus, you see him there as being the correspondent analyzing elections in Russia for RT. This is a very big deal in their world. It's interesting that Lazansky and Bausman were hosted at a conference together. This is years ago, and Bausman must have been a little bit green. And he starts doing his presentation at this conference, and the video or projector wasn't working. So he had to make it up or try to remember what he had to say all on his own. And he gets very lost very quickly. And who does he turn to help answer the questions that are being asked? He turns to Ed Lazansky, who's hosting the event. And it's a little bit of insight. I'm not reading too much into it. It's worth taking a look at what's happening here.
But I could mention a lot of blogs. I was supposed to show all this on the video, but it's not working. So I'll just have to tell you about it. Another site that is very good is fortrose.com. We use a lot of material from there. There's a blog called The Moon of Alabama. Now, I have no idea who runs it. I get the feeling the guy's probably in Germany. But I would recommend that very much. We use that a lot. Help me, Ed. What are some of the other ones?
I think since we cannot show it, we have emails of people, so we will send them all. Actually, some of those sites were listed in the program. So
a lot of them are listed on the program.
So help me, Ed. Help me answer the question I should know the answer to because I'm the editor of this publication. Why does Ed Lazansky need to answer that question? Why wouldn't he know the answer to that? And why does Ed Lazansky know that all these things are actually in the program and they'll have it available via email for everybody? This is a telltale sign of an operation. When the guy who's presenting doesn't remember his lines and the video isn't playing, suddenly, he brings in Ed Lazansky, the master-in-chief here of Russian interference, to help him answer these questions. I think it's very telling. It's an interesting clip, nevertheless.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, I feel like Charles felt like he was going to be punished after that. Like, that was very demoralizing. And Lazansky did not look happy. I watched the entire thing. Bausman tries to project a sort of a story that he created this publication and it suddenly became a runaway hit because of its amazing content. But none of it rings true. And he started it in Moscow and then decided to move to Pennsylvania to continue running it in 2017 or something like that. It's an unusual timeline. If he was starting it in Russia, why wouldn't he stay in Russia? If he needed to come back to the States, why wouldn't he have started the publication after arriving here? Not incubated it in Moscow somewhere. And he's so well-spoken, Zev. I mean, that's the first time I've seen him kind of stutter or fumble over his words. I mean, I've been watching so much of this guy and he's incredibly articulate. He doesn't use very often. He doesn't forget words. And so that was really interesting for me because I hadn't seen that. It
was early on. That's the thing. I found it so interesting. He hadn't yet studied all these lines as well as he needs to. And you're absolutely right. He very rarely misses beat. And here he was missing a really important beat in a few of them at this conference. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of been in front of crowds where I've forgotten some of the things that I wanted to tell them.
Me too.
It happens.
Yeah.
It does happen. But, if you're giving something like that and you're doing it in front of your torsion, if you will, you should really know.
Yeah, I mean, look, he claims to have put together a video that he was about to play, and it was a slideshow. He would have known what it was in there. He wouldn't have needed that to help him. But who knows? I mean, we don't read too much into it. Certainly, I have no problem thinking and saying out loud that this man has all the appearances to me of a Russian agent. He certainly fits the profile. The activities he did certainly fit the profile. The fact that he was rushed back to his farm to do the documentary that was then aired on Rossiya, which is Russian state television. They wouldn't just do that for anybody. And by the way, in the Russian documentary, they talk about him being a descendant of George Ross and Betsy Ross and all these, these crazy claims. I mean, maybe they're true, but I doubt it. So, they've positioned him as someone who's a real authority figure on American history and on American politics when he's not.
A patriot.
Yeah, a real patriot. Yeah. So I find it, I think people need to be spending a little more time focusing on who this guy is and all the other Russian operatives, because there are so many, as we've discussed on the show before, that hung around in this world of Trump Russia and all the way into January the 6th. And not only Russian operatives, clearly there were Chinese operatives, there were all sorts of other nationalities there, but the Russians ones just stare at you. I mean, it's sort of like it's hard to avoid them, and they're pretty evident. And it does feel to me like the Russians are beginning to wrap up their operations in the United States, because a lot of people are dying. A lot of people have returned home, as we've noted. Maria Butina has gone back home. Symes has gone back home. Now Bausman has gone back home. And it's interesting that Ivan Reichlen is still wandering around in the United States. But as this chart shows, especially at the bottom line there's a lot of Russian involvement, plus Russian involvement in InfoWars, as we've just shown you in Alex Jones's world, but also Russian involvement in the Washington Times and in the OAN television station, and also Russian Insider, which we've now spoken about. So that's all I got. Any last thoughts, Gal or Joe?
Two things. That last slide that you put up, not this one, the one that showed Dmitry Symes and all those names like Oleg Deripaska and that. Looking at that and seeing Paul Manafort's name on there.
Mm-hmm. This is Patrick Simpson and Grant Stern's document. Yeah.
That's right. And remembering that it was Paul Manafort who recommended Mike Pence. And now Mike Pence going through this sort of, I don't know if I should cooperate with the committee, and I'm not sure if I don't know, maybe Karen needs to tell me to pray on it. And I'm going to have to ask Mother. I mean, that's just one sort of point that I wanted to point out there. The other thing is, at the end of your show, you always like to say, do you have anything to plug? And I actually have something to plug.
Okay.
I'm plugging democracy tonight because tomorrow the Senate is starting to move forward, I believe, with debate voting rights. And if you don't want to live in a country that we were just talking about for the past hour and a half, about all these different things about gaslighting and all these different things about revolution and all these autocracy and tyranny and everything else. Democracy is awesome. I can't express it enough. Call your senators. They're starting tomorrow. Schumer's doing, I believe he just came out with some process that he's doing. It's a process that 3 agreement process. I don't know exactly the name of it, but it has to do with the House. And it's whether or not the House and the Senate can agree on language within bills. And if they don't agree within 3 times, the Senate can't filibuster it.
Oh, interesting.
So they're going to be moving forward with the process. I believe it starts tomorrow. They're looking to have a vote by MLK, which I believe is Monday. But the point is, you've got to call your senators. Even if you live in a blue state and your senators are already going to vote for democracy and vote for voting rights, call your senators. And if you have friends in West Virginia, call their senators, call Joe Manchin. You can do this. That's why democracy allows us to make phone calls across all states. So you can call senators, call Arizona, call West Virginia. Democracy is on the line, and I cannot stress that enough.
Thank you for saying that so forcefully and well, Joe. It's so important. And just to underline, just because your senator might be a Democrat doesn't mean they'll vote yes or that they're supportive of voting rights. And we want to make sure that every single senator is going to vote. And that means some pressure from voters. So no matter who your senator is, call them and tell them you want this voting rights bill passed, especially Republicans, because there might be some soft Republicans who are scared of losing their seats. But there also might be some Democrats who are maybe a little wavering or hiding behind Manchin as an excuse not to vote. But absolutely, call your senators, call your representatives, insist that they support democracy. And, it's not hard to see why democracy is better than what the alternative is. When you look at this kind of state propaganda that we've been airing tonight from Russia, you certainly know that you don't want to live in that country. Gal, any thoughts from you? Any last thoughts from you?
I mean, I can't really follow up on that except to give you the phone number, and that is 202-224-3121.
Who's that
is
number?
for the U.S. Senate.
U.S. Senate.
That will go directly to the switchboard. and you can call your U.S. Senate.
Call the Senate. Call the Senate. Call your senator and insist they support the voting rights bill. And it's the 17th, I believe, is the date. So that's the number. Call away, and that's very well done, Joe. Thank you very much for doing it. That's at Joe Dempsey. You can find him there.
At Dempsey 2.
At Dempsey 2. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm going to get this right one of these days. And at Gal_Suburban, who one day will get on camera. I'm convinced of it. Great job on this and last night. Thank you so much for being here, Gal.
Thank you.
All right, and that's the show for tonight. We wish you a very good night. We'll be back for the after show on Friday. Thanks again for being here and for supporting Narrative. Have a good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.